Hi there, my name is Maxine Kwok, and I'm a member of the first violins in the London Symphony Orchestra. So I've taken over the live chat for today. So thanks to everyone who's joining us to watch. I'm very excited to be able to chat and interview the wonderful composer Danny Kidane. So Danny's actually over in Estonia right now, so he's 2 hours ahead. Hello to everyone who's tuning in from all over. It's going to be a fast and furious, lots of questions. So if people have questions, pop them in the comments. But I apologise if we don't get to everything because I think there's quite a lot of people out there. So I really hope you'll find it interesting and informative. And hi Danny.
Hi, how is everybody?
Oh, it's lovely and sunny over there. You're in
Yeah,
Estonia, right?
I'm in Estonia. Yeah, that's correct. It's nice
Oh,
and sunny over here. The weather's been thankfully quite warm. No rain so far, so far so good.
excellent. Now, I wanted to talk to you specifically today because, of course, the LSO, we haven't been able to work, but tomorrow we start by putting on a series of recitals once a week from our home LSO St Luke's. And fortunately, I get to play in St Luke's tomorrow with my colleague and friend Julian, and we are playing a world premiere that you wrote in lockdown, I guess,
Yeah,
and that asked if you would, give us a piece. So do you want to tell us a bit about your inspirations behind it, or even how it came about?
yeah. So it was in a way, a sort of a following piece for. I wrote a piece earlier to the one that I wrote for you guys, and it was called Veiled Light. So the idea was, as the title suggests, a sort of the light, metaphorical light, if you want to call it that, of the lockdown period, and it was veiled away. So, referring to the idea of, uh, staying at home or staying locked away and quarantining. So the following piece that is for you guys is called Dappled Light. So the idea behind that is that the light is gently and sort of gradually coming through. So you know can be alluding to hopefully a return to normality and that sort of stuff. So it's I'd say the pieces are coupled in that sense. So if you do have a chance, do listen to the first piece that I came up with. It was premiered by a violinist from the BBC Symphony Orchestra, and it's available online on Twitter and everywhere. So do check it out. It will give you an idea of the sort of sound world that your piece will be following on to.
It's a wonderful sound world. It's very there's sort of mystery and great atmosphere in it actually because funny enough, Julian was asking me. He said, "What is dappled mean?" And it's quite obviously he's Colombian, so he wasn't quite sure of the word. And I was trying to sort of explain it as best I could. But to be
Yeah,
honest, I think the effects that you've used for the two violins is really, really effective of just seeing this lights just
yeah,
coming through. And you did train as a violinist,
yeah,
right?
yeah. True.
So so we hope to
Many
do
moons ago.
we hope to do your piece justice. But that must be very in that case, a lot easier to write for instruments that that you understand the workings of.
Yeah, I suppose so. It's great to you know I suppose some composers see it as a restriction, and in a sense, I actually didn't write anything for violin for many years after I sort of stopped playing and started composing. So on one hand, it's great to know how the instrument really works and the capabilities, but then in the back of your head, you're sort of thinking, you've still got that sort of violinist hat on. Will this work? Does it compare to other pieces and stuff? Whereas, when you're writing for other instruments that you don't necessarily play, your mind is completely free, and you don't sort of think, oh, it's, you don't have any borders or sort of restrictions in that sense. So yeah, it's a sort of a dual challenge in that sense, but it's obviously great to know that, especially with more technical things such as harmonics or position changes and stuff, really knowing how that works is handy. Yeah.
Because nothing in the piece that doesn't work. I mean, we did say, gosh, you must have been very good at playing fifths. Violinists don't really like playing fifths, and we have moments when we both have fifths.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay. But it's a great effect, that interval. I know.
Yeah. I suppose that the thinking behind the fifths is that it is a challenge, but even if it's if it's not bang on, totally in tune, it's still every performance in that sense has its own sort of slight coloration or hue of light, if you want to call it that, because obviously as wherever you may be, the light is always slightly different. So it does have that that any detuning that you might have is okay. So I'm not one of those composers that is totally, it has to be, you get the sort of measurements out and measure each sort of interval, and it has to be completely clean. It's an organic piece in that sense. So don't worry.
Thank you. That's given me a lot of hope for tomorrow's concert, that you'll be listening, and if it's not 100% perfectly in tune, you won't be worried. Oh, Danny won't mind.
Yeah.
But it is absolutely beautiful. I mean, I'm obviously when we spoke about the piece you were writing, and you were saying, oh, it's a sort of slightly Copland-esque sound world and things, and I didn't quite know really what to expect. Most of the time I'm playing orchestral music, so effects are much easier to get. Because you have the scope of 80 people create with their different instruments, and certainly with two violins. Was that difficult at all, writing for two instruments that basically hold the same register? And it's, to be honest, it's not a massively wide register either. Or did that come through?
I suppose it's as a composer, again, I like to deal with restrictions, so it's you can use it to your own advantage, in the sense that when you're dealing with a full orchestra, there are so many choices that you can do whatever you want, really. But when you have a smaller palette and or the same instrument, in the ensemble, it can be, I like the idea that how can you make it sound different, or what can you do to sort of allude or to try and change the sounds that the instruments are making, or how can you combine them to make them into like a one meta instrument, almost like a violin with four strings, or 4 strings each, or if you're playing double stops combined together, that's 4 potential notes that you could have. So in that sense, it's I'm all for restrictions, and I don't think it's for me, it wasn't something that I thought, oh my god, I have to deal with the same instrument in that sense. And I think the other nice thing is that the violin itself is a very resonant instrument, so allowing that the resonance, as listeners will hear tomorrow, to ring out and to reverberate is ever present in the piece.
Yeah, those are wonderful moments. We've been really enjoying every time we get to do that, and we hear the reverberation around in St. Luke's. So I think it's very effective, and I hope that we took the decision that when you've done that, and maybe there's a bar's rest, that you're not counting on us to count but it's just a case of letting the sound.
Yeah, there is a element of freedom. I mean, I don't think I don't actually remember now, but I don't think I put any fermatas in. So it is, it is measured, but it is free. So it's, it's not too, I didn't want to put the fermatas in to make it too long. So,
yes.
it will it sort of it lasts as long as the ring
Sound.
lasts. So and yeah.
Yeah.
So again, that depends on the venue. I know that LSO St Luke's is quite a has a very good acoustic, and because of the high ceilings and probably the lack of a lot of people in the space, it will probably ring out. So it's yeah, I think it will sound quite good. So looking
Someone
for
asks here, how is it, I'm going to sort of translate it as I think, how is it possible when you hear the pieces in your head? Do you hear it in your head and then compose it, or is it sort of just coming through in some other way? It's not fully
um,
formed, or...
yeah, I think it can be either or really. It's sometimes you start with a really strong idea, and you might have like a a skeleton structure, or quite a sort of strong structure of the piece. Sometimes you start with a tiny fragment and then it develops organically. I quite like, I think it was Benjamin Britten sort of, he had an analogy where he said composing is like driving up to a house in the mist, and you've got the headlights on and you see more and more of it as you approach the house closer. So the idea behind that is that the longer that you spend working on a piece or working with the notes, or whether it's melodies or harmonies or however you'd like to categorize the piece, you begin to know it more and more and more. So you understand the fabric, and you sort of understand where it should go next and how it should develop. So it's as much a journey of discovery for me as the composer, because obviously when you start with the first bar, you have a totally different understanding from when you're at the sort of penultimate bar of the piece. It's you have you have the hindsight, and you know that that is how it should be. So it's definitely a journey.
Yeah, but and so how did you move from, obviously did you just have an upbringing where you learnt music at schools, as like, because you were brought up like me
Yeah,
in London, in
yeah.
England, and so
Uh,
you went through the usual music lessons at school.
Roots, I suppose. I think my very first instrument was recorder.
Oh
Um,
yes,
I
there was,
think it's the
it was
sort of that,
always the group.
yeah, that sort of plastic recorder that I had. And for me, it was fun, but also, it was I really, so we had a recorder ensemble, and we used to play during assembly and all that sort of stuff. So it was for me, it was a nice way to socialize, but also make music. I suppose that at that stage in my life, I never thought that it would develop into something as serious as writing for orchestras and that sort of stuff. But
But you
it,
liked it already straight away. You were,
yeah, so yeah, it was well, on a very basic level, it was fun. To make music, to be able to play stuff, it was to socialize. It was all, some people like playing football, some people like playing in recorder ensemble. It's um, definitely, for me, it was something to do. I don't know whether it is a way of me also sort of skipping lessons as well, perhaps. But it was definitely fun, and I enjoyed all the activities that sort of came with it. Performing, as I say, at assembly, or various sort of, because I went to a Catholic school, so they wheeled the recorder ensemble out at various festivals, and
yeah, like me, I was at a Catholic school
yeah,
too.
so it was yeah, it was definitely fun. And then after that, um, I took up the violin. That was a few years later. So I studied at Saturday school. So it was called Centre for Young Musicians. So it was like a local Saturday school where kids went to learn basic sort of theory and harmony and stuff, and also first study violin. And then after that, I picked up a second study piano.
Okay.
Uh, and then it was only until so after that I went to study Morley College, which is a sort of,
Southern,
in Waterloo, London, and then after that I went to study at the Royal College of Music Junior Department, where I took up formally composing and had lessons for the first time. And then after that, I think it was roughly at that point, towards the end of my time at the Royal College of Music Junior Department, where I decided that it would be a good time to, take up composing seriously. So, devote more time to it and, actually listen to other composers, study scores and that sort of stuff. I then took a gap year and I studied in St. Petersburg in Russia at the conservatoire there, where I did both composition and violin. And then after that, when I went to study at the Royal Northern College of Music in Manchester, that's where I did the sort of full switch, where I took up composing as my primary and first study, and I never sort of looked back since, I suppose. And I haven't really practiced 2006 on the violin, so I suppose.
Oh right, so you're not going to give us anything on the violin today?
There's no violin here for me to be playing anyway.
Oh, you're lucky. We'll let you off this time. But do you remember a time where you just thought, actually, playing music is less for me than actually wanting to create something new?
Yeah. I think I got to a stage in the in my sort of practice where not that I got bored, but I think I got a bit tired of just repeating things, in the sense that, I wanted to create. I think that urge to create and make my own music took over slightly. Perhaps it was also to do with, as a youngster, the core repertoire that I learned was very, maybe romantic or classical, and I didn't really do a lot of contemporary stuff. So in my head, I had an urge to explore that sort of other side of new music and new classical, new contemporary, all the sort of strands that you might associate with new music. And I sort of went down that rabbit hole and I never came back out.
Well, that's good then.
Yeah.
So you found that through that sort of journey, you had a lot of good teaching for the composing. You felt inspired.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, so I studied at the Royal Northern College of Music, where I studied with Gary Carpenter and David Horn, and they were, brilliant professors whilst I was there. And the department in general was very supportive, very open. There was no sort of house style, so nobody was forced to write in any sort of way. And the other great thing about my time there was that I think it was once a term actually, you had the chance to write for full orchestra. So it was, a brilliant platform to really make the most of that, sort of trying things out and, talking to musicians. I think the other great thing about the Royal Northern was that the students and the sort of atmosphere was very collaborative. Everybody was always open to trying things out, or you could easily go and talk to a fellow student or a fellow composer and sort of create new stuff. That was the sort of breeding ground for new works and new ideas.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And you, I think, are you half Russian?
Yeah, I'm half Russian, half Eritrean. But born and raised in London. So yeah, my mum's from Russia and my dad's from Eritrea, East Africa.
Wow.
So yeah, it's quite a mix of cultures and heritage. So it's good. I try and feed off of all the little bits that I've picked up across the way. I usually think to myself that the rhythmical side is perhaps from Africa, and then the sort of more lyrical, the linear side of the melody is from Russia.
Yeah.
And the contemporary side of things, the lust for modern culture and all that sort of stuff is more from the UK. So it's this amalgamation of all those different things, and it's come in handy.
Definitely, it's a real mix of cultures. Do you think that's what influenced you to go and study in St. Petersburg, or was that completely
Yeah,
by?
I think at that point it was. I obviously knew that the sort of Russian violin school was quite strong. You know, it's very
Mm.
I don't want to call it hardcore, but it's very methodical, and it's very, they get your technique right and all of that sort of stuff. So in my head, I was like, okay, I've got to do, you know, my 8 hours a day and do my Schradik and Kreutzer
Wow.
studies, you know, learn the pag.
Get into the LSO,
Yeah,
Danny.
yeah, learn caprices, and I'm sure you sort of know the method and the sort of lineage of, you know, trying to follow in the greats of. I remember at one point studying in the same classroom. I think was Cloud. What was his name? Aura was he the teacher of Heifetz? And I remember seeing like a little plaque on the door, and I thought to myself, oh, this is, you know, pretty cool. You know, I'm standing in the same room where Yasha
Yeah.
Heifetz once studied many moons ago. So it's I suppose it was like the holy grail of places to study as a string player for at least you know, a year. So I went there, but then I think in my head there was definitely a lack of the lust for new. So that's in a way, I suppose, quite a fortuitous event in the sense that it it I was convinced at that point that I needed more to supplement my sort of eagerness to learn new things and to compose and all that sort of stuff. So that's when I decided to sort of shift back to the UK and probably go to the one of the hippest towns in the north,
Yeah.
or in the UK in general. I mean Manchester's pretty thriving, and the sort of culture, various hubbub of different music scenes in Manchester, and Liverpool's great. So I was well suited for that area.
Mhm. And you do speak Russian, don't you?
Yeah,
You
yeah, I do.
we've had a request if you could
All
say
right.
something to us in Russian. I don't know if you want to
Okay.
invite people to
Yeah,
the
я,
conference
я
tomorrow.
могу говорить по-русски. Да, я очень свободно говорю. Я рад, что я выучил русский язык, когда маленький был. Так что надеюсь, что для если кто-то слушает и может понимать, что я говорю, так что классно.
Well, I don't know what you said, but I'm very that sounded fantastic. So I don't know if somebody's asking me where in the UK. I think I'm wondering if they mean at the moment Danny's actually in Estonia, which is why the weather looks so wonderful.
Yeah, yeah.
But you came back from St. Petersburg and then went to Manchester, right?
Yeah, more or less, sort of immediately. So, although I grew up in London, I decided to sort of move away from home and family and sort of devote my time to trying something new completely, you know. Move in my head it was like a nice thing to do, sort of escape from the clutches of home family life, and, you know, go to a new place to try and find yourself, if you want to call it that. Lack
But
of
I
a
think
better.
that's normal, isn't it? Everyone has
Yeah,
to take that step of
yeah, yeah.
being their own person, discovering new things. And so what instruments do you play? So you play the violin and the piano, or you did?
Yeah, well, I can play the violin. I probably don't want to hear myself play the violin, but I can, you know, I can. People always say, "Oh, so why don't you pick the violin up anymore and just play?" I suppose it's like, you know, if you're an athlete and you're sort of at the top of your game and you haven't practiced for, I don't know, it's 2006, many years anyway.
A
So
long time then.
I don't want to sort of. I'd rather remember the memories that I have in the back of my head of myself sort of playing well. Right.
It's hard enough when you come back after, say, 3 weeks of not playing. I think, let alone I can't imagine if you haven't played for about 15
Yeah.
years. Somebody asked, do you compose at the piano? Is that how it works?
Yes. So what I tend to do is start at the piano, and then once I've got sort of the the, the skeleton or the chordal structures figured out, I can then sort of step away from the piano and then just do it all in my head. Basically, I've got to a point where you can hear stuff. So I suppose a lot of composers historically have either used the piano as a sort of tool to figure harmonies out and to, you know, voicing and that sort of stuff. Or some composers have, you know, if you're blessed with perfect pitch or that sort of stuff, then you can hear it in your head. Unfortunately, I don't have perfect pitch, so I have to resort to some sort of instrument to make sure that I'm not writing in sort of microtonal music.
No, because I think some of us have this idea of what, you know, we've all seen Amadeus, the film,
Yeah.
and we'll have this idea of the moment Salieri sees, you know, his scores, and they're all instantly having been written out from his head. And I'm sure that very, very, very few composers can actually work in that way, where it's just completely formed and you can hear what actual notes are in its entirety.
Yeah, a lot of, I mean, you can, again, if we go back to the sort of the actual process of composing, you can write different sketches. You can, you know, sometimes when I start with a bit of music, it might not necessarily be the beginning of the piece. You know, it might be the middle section, or, you know, I might start writing and think, actually, oh, that would be really good at the end, so let's switch it around. And so, you know, it's a organic process, and it takes, you know, once you start that journey on a piece, you understand more where things fit. And it's, I suppose I always say that, you know, as a kid I used to like to play with Lego because of the sort of puzzle solving element, you know, trying to fit things in. And then once I built actually like a, you know, a Lego thing, what can you do with the pieces? What else can you create? So, you know, trying to transform it into something else. So it's a similar sort of, it's like Lego for adults in a way. You have notes, you have your notes to use. So what can you do with them? How can you change them? So it's 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 a fun sort of adult Lego
fun,
puzzle.
Someone's asked, have you written any works for clarinet, or perhaps with clarinet? I'm a clarinet player at the Baja California in Mexico. So...
Yeah, I think I have written stuff for clarinet. I think I've written a piece for string quartet and clarinet. There's a solo piece for clarinet. I have a sort of orchestral piece, so chamber orchestra and clarinet with oboe. So yeah, there are, you know, get in touch and we can have a chat. I'm always happy to discuss pieces, or if people need ideas for their programs and stuff. So yeah, do get in touch.
Someone says, how can we get your music? So I guess people can contact you through social media, via your website.
Yeah.
And, you know,
definitely. Just contact me on. I'm prevalent on Twitter, but recently joined also Instagram because I've realised that, you know, I can't be stuck in the early noughties. I have to get with the time. So I'm also on Instagram now, Twitter. Yeah, just drop us a message and we can have a chat.
Yeah, oh, that's great. And of course, you know, I know you from writing really symphonic music, because so when did your sort of collaboration, if you like, or the moment you started doing things with the LSO, how did that all come about?
I think it was probably, so the LSO, as you probably know, do a lot of schemes for composers. So I was fortunate enough to, I think, take part in all of them actually across a period of perhaps 10 years. So we
would have workshopped your pieces in, say,
basically,
workshop. Did you enjoy that experience? I always wonder what it must feel like. For obviously,
I think it's definitely a great opportunity. It's also a great way to, you know, make links with players and you know, have that moment to, you know, work with top class musicians and really ask them questions about things, or, you know, try things out. The time that you're afforded with the instrumentalists is invaluable, really. It's very useful for a composer to, you know, even though we write things and we know how everything works and stuff, but there are so many variables in terms of, you know, one player might play it this way, another player might play it another way. So having that chance to work and fine tune things, and at the end of it having really good recordings or videos that you can then use to send on to other organizations to hear how your music sounds. It's great. And then obviously the more you're involved in I think some of the sort of administrative members of the LSO like to call it the LSO families. Once you're in the family group, it's, you know, it's everyone's very approachable, and it's a great platform for composers to hear their music and develop, I think. So yeah,
We can
big
see,
shout.
I know they've done like sound hard performances at LSO St Luke's, I think, with my Claire on the violin and things. I think once you're sort of able to be part of these schemes, the sort of opportunities to have your works played just kind of must really increase. And what I sort of liked about the workshops is, because obviously when we first started doing them years ago, and you sort of think, oh gosh, you know, does anyone want to sort of pipe up to say, actually, that doesn't really work in the confines of my instrument, but it all feels just so collaborative. And when you know, they say to the composer that, but oh right, okay, and then the piece is kind of worked on, and perhaps we end up playing it in the next season. Even, it must be great.
Yeah, I mean, having the chance to, I mean, you can, you know, when you're working with the orchestra, to have a moment to stop and ask questions, or, you know, communicate through the conductor things that might need to be slightly tweaked, or in that sense, it not only is it helpful in that context, but it's also helpful, you know, if you then go to work with other orchestras or ensembles to have that experience of, you know, piping up and actually saying something, and not sitting there sort of behind your score, hidden away. It's a good learning platform.
And I'm sure that everyone will, even if they perhaps haven't recognised your name today, of course, you have a piece called Woke, which was the first piece played in the last night of the proms, only last year.
Yeah.
How did that feel? That must have been a massive highlight.
The magic moment. I think it doesn't fully hit you until you're there sitting on the night, and it was premiered at the Albert Hall, and it was also broadcast live around the world, sort of on radio and TV. So it's quite difficult to describe that you're sitting there listening to your piece, sort of really I was really trying to sort of hear everything, and, you know, making sure that, you know, mentally going through the score as I was listening, but then sort of in moments I was thinking, oh my god, I'm also here listening to it with, you know, 5,000 to 6,000 other people in this concert, plus, you know, however many
7,000 in there.
Sure. Oh, okay, but even more. Plus all the people on.
Was that a world premiere? So, because somebody asked, how does it feel the moment you hear your music for the first time? And that might even just be in the first rehearsal, because you won't.
Yeah, I think in a way that's what got me hooked on composing, is it's having that hearing your piece come to life. It is quite an addictive experience in that sense. You know, I can't quite compare it to anything else. It's you've imagined something from nothing, and it comes into the ether through musical instruments, and, you know, you get to work with musicians. It's you know, I recommend everybody, at least perhaps once in their life, to try and compose something, even if it's for, you know, piano, or a rhythm on a pen, or whatever. Just, you know, go out and do some writing and try and get somebody to play it somewhere. There's a very deep sense of satisfaction when you hear your piece come to life. So yeah, highly recommended.
Okay, that's good. And someone asks, what is your advice for young people who would really like to become composers?
I would say get in touch with composers who are alive. You know, it's a small community, I suppose. So we're a friendly bunch of people, and if you're really interested, there are lots of schemes, and in the I'm sort of talking globally here, but I'm referring to the UK, United Kingdom, and there's lots of establishments and organisations who are keen to help young learners and young composers. You know, similar to the schemes that LSO do. There are organisations like Sound and Music, or London Music Masters, and that they try and assist and sort of point people in the right direction. So it's don't be afraid to reach out. I'd say, the biggest sort of thing not to do is just to sort of sit and be afraid and sort of think to yourself, oh, I'd really love to do that, but I can't be. I'm too afraid to sort of reach out. Make that first step, and I'm sure people. I get emails and messages from teachers or parents of younger people who are keen to play pieces or want a bit of advice or something, and I'm always happy to give advice or even meet up or have a phone call or video chat just to share my own experiences, because at the end of the day it's a journey, and the more people that are in music, it's a better sort of environment. I think classical music should be there for everybody. It shouldn't be niche. It's a great thing and to experience and be involved in. So the more people that get involved, the merrier it will be, I think.
Absolutely. This kind of leads on into a question somebody asked a few minutes ago about, is there anything you would want to change about the music industry? As you just said, we don't want classical music to be niche or in a thing. Is this something that you're quite passionate about?
Yeah, I think. Well, I'm a big advocate of diversity, and my own I grew up on an estate in inner city London, so it's classical music can be seen as being a bit elitist or a bit segregated in the sense that it can only be afforded by certain people, or perhaps it's not welcoming to particular groups of people. So if I were to change anything, I think it would be just to try and everybody in the industry just to do their best to make it as welcoming and as approachable for people to get involved in. It's I won't get into details here, but there's lots of different sort of ways of making music diverse and approachable. So the more people can think about that in the industry, this is a sort of subliminal message to people in the industry already, to really think about how you program things, what you're doing to make programs more inclusive, or to get a wider audience into your concert hall, or your education schemes. Are they viable to everybody? What could you do more to get everybody involved? All it takes is just a bit more thinking sometimes to really to make it even bigger for everybody to be able to enjoy it. So yeah.
Yeah, and this kind of leads on to somebody else's question, which is, what do you think about electronic music, mixing electronic music or acoustic instruments into?
Yeah, I think it's great. So I'm all for, again, this is I suppose some people think that classical music is only one certain type of thing. I think people have a vision of classical music as perhaps the more classical, end of things, with people like Mozart or Beethoven or Bach. You have your standard setup of a orchestra, but actually classical music, contemporary classical music, as I like to sort of call it, is the broadest probably of all genres, because you can do whatever you want. You can mix with electronic music, you can take elements of jazz, you can people I have some very close friends and colleagues who use turntables in their pieces. A composer called Shiva Fasharaki, who, go and check her out, she's also on Twitter and Instagram. She uses turntables in her pieces, and it's as well as live instruments, and it's a quite an enchanting sound world. So there's so much to explore and discover. It's not one type of music. It's lots of different types of music within the sort of bigger heading of classical music.
I know, because sometimes people get very surprised if they see on a concert platform, drum kit or something.
Yeah.
But that's not classical. And it's like, there's pieces with,
Yeah.
saxophones and all.
Saxophone. Yeah, I mean, well, saxophones are sort of old school instrument now within in the realm of, but Shostakovich and people like that used saxophone. But yeah, it's definitely go to as many concerts as you can, and places like the Barbican, places like the South Bank Centre, they're very good at not offering a very narrow view of classical music. They usually have quite a broad sense of what classical music is, and definitely go and check them out. There's also lots of smaller concerts going on, obviously not now because of lockdown and the things associated with that, but hopefully once things get back to normal, I think things do take the chance to try and go to a concert that you wouldn't necessarily go to. Go to something where you think, oh, okay, this might be slightly out of my comfort zone, but I'm going to check it out. Just see, you might like it, you might not. I suppose it's like anything in life. You would perhaps try a dish, and if you like, yeah. If you don't, you don't. But it's my theory is it's always good to try. So
if you don't try, you don't know.
Go out and try stuff. Yeah.
Now, I know this came from a bass player, but he asks, what is your favorite instrument to write for? Or is there an instrument that you really want to write for that you haven't really had a chance to expand on?
That's a very good question. I think so I'll approach it in two different sort of separate categories. So, in an orchestral format, I like to write for wind instruments. And I think the reason for that is because I think it's to do with the sort of textures and what my ear is sort of likes. I suppose it's like your mouth has a palate and you like certain tastes. And I suppose in my ear, the sort of sounds or the rhythms that I like to create are better suited to wind instruments. So in that sense, in an orchestral context, I'd say that my sort of favorite group are wind instruments. I mean, even though I was a string player, it sounds a bit odd, but in a chamber group context, I would say that my favorite instruments are string instruments, because I suppose what I like is the resonance. So in my head, when I'm dealing with strings, I always think I like the idea of sound being projected and that sort of reverberation and acoustic that sound world that you can create with strings just sort of dissipating into thin air. I suppose in all honesty, I don't have a singular sort of favorite instrument. I don't.
Okay.
I'm much more. I love all the instruments.
That's good. Well, I mean, if you're writing for full, symphony orchestra, do you often write music? Somebody asks here, do you often write music without knowing what kind of acoustic it's going to be performed in? And in which case, does that affect how you compose?
Yes and no, I suppose. When I was writing for the Last Night at the Proms piece, I knew that it was going to be in the Albert Hall, and I knew that the rehearsal wouldn't start until sort of closer to the concert day. So I suppose you have to take into consideration how it might sound. So you try and speak to people who have had their pieces played there, or you speak to orchestral members who have played there. So you get a feel for the sort of acoustic that you might be writing for. So the other thing to consider is that the acoustic of any building is different from when it's empty to when it's got an audience in it.
Absolutely.
So, with the Albert Hall, when it's empty, it's quite boomy. But when there are thousands of people in there, it's totally different. It's a lot drier, and there isn't so much reverberation, and sort of the sound doesn't bounce around that much. So I think at the end of the day, you have to write what you want to write, but also keep in mind, where, if I was asked to write something that was site specific, so for a very particular type of concert hall, or maybe like a spatially dispersed performance, then I would I'd really have to take into consideration how the sort of sound would move around. But I suppose the other thing to remember is once you write a piece, it can be performed in other places, so that element of total control will never be fully within your grasp, because it could be performed in a smaller hall or in a bigger hall, so you just have to take it with a pinch of salt.
Oh, there's an interesting question here. When you hear your own music being performed, can you ever let go of the score in your head? Are there any pleasant surprises left for you?
That's a good question. I would say yes. Sometimes there are things, even though I'm the composer and I've written the piece, there are things that you didn't factor in, or slight sections that you think, oh, okay, that worked better than I thought it would, or perhaps it could be the other way around. It could be, that section didn't work as well as I thought it would. So I suppose it's again, I'm going to refer back to cooking, but if you're trying out a new dish or something along those lines, or you're cooking a new dish, you sort of try as you cook. Perhaps some composers even put into their contracts, the sort of composing contracts, that they must have an X amount of rehearsals where they can perhaps change things if they really need to. If something doesn't sound the way that they want it to sound, or is totally off of what they imagine, then they have that the scope to change it or amend. So yeah. Something to think of.
Well, and actually, there's a question here which I'm going to kind of expand on. Someone says, without a composition brief, how do you approach new projects? In which case, I want to ask, have you got any exciting new projects in the pipeline?
Yeah, so I'm writing a few pieces for choir at the minute, which is quite nice because I haven't done anything for choir quite a while. But actually, when I was younger, I used to sing quite a lot. So I used to, on my route into composition, I sang for the English National Opera children's chorus when I was a kid. So I had the pleasure of singing various operas. I think I did La Bohème, Carmen, Boris Godunov, and actually, funny enough, a piece that I sang in, opera that I sang in, called The Silver Tassie by Mark Anthony Turnage, was a real sort of turning point for me, even as a kid. This was sort of before I studied composition, and it stuck in the back of my head, that it was, in comparison to the other operas that I was singing in, it was new, the sound world was totally different, and I think it was a lot in the back of my head to go and explore that sort of sound world later on in life. So
did you have an actual
chorus,
a sort of composer that inspired you more than anybody else? Was there one composer that particularly made you, make you dream about composing? Or
I'm a big fan of Stravinsky. If that if I were to sort of point somebody out, also enjoy Guy Badulina, Ligeti, Bach,
but yeah, we've played all of them.
yeah. I mean, there's, again, this is a sort of what's your favorite piece, or what's your favorite composer type of question, or it's really difficult to sort of pinpoint one particular person or one particular piece. It's there's so many great composers and great pieces out there that I tend not to say that person is my all-time favorite. It's much more complicated. I suppose it's what you're in the mood for. Sometimes I like to listen to this, and on other days I like to listen to something else. So it's definitely very sort of broad.
Well, someone asks, actually, what would we find if we went and looked on your Spotify playlist? Is it very eclectic? A bit of...
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I tend to listen to all sorts. It's not, again, it's my idea of sort of classical music is very broad. So it involves everything and anything. I don't have a fixed, so lately I've been listening to Sean Shibe's new guitar album of Bach, and then there's also stuff by Kendrick Lamar, and then there's also stuff by Go Penguin, who are sort of more sort of
I have
jazz.
that on mine
Yeah.
too.
So yeah, I mean, it's you know, there is. I don't have a particular thing. I think that the other good thing with, I suppose, musicians and composers especially is that you're always curious. I think it's that the curiousness that drives you, and you know, at the end of the day, we're as composers, we're dealing with sounds, and you know, we're all about the sounds, the textures, the rhythms. So the more that we can ingest in that sense, you know, I've always got a hunger for listening to new things, and doesn't have to be classical. It could be jazz, could be rap, it could be, you know, rock, whatever it might be. But it's that thirst to hear things, you know, hear the new, I suppose. You know, you're always interested to hear, oh, that's, I've never heard that sound before. You know, how does that composer or that musician create that sound? What are they doing there? Is it, you know, is it a combination of certain, you know, harmonics or electronics or whatever it may be? So it's that thirst and constant drive to discover new things, I suppose, that keeps my idea of and broadness in what I listen to.
Okay, because as you say, the composing world is quite small, certainly within, you know, living composers now. So do you find you kind of almost feed off each other's ideas, and you're always interested to hear what new things people are doing, in which case it broadens your own soundscape?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, one of the great things about the UK is that that you know, I think the broadness of styles, and in that sense, you know, everybody's just doing their own sort of thing. It's not like Darmstadt back in the day, where, you know, if you didn't compose a certain way, you were sort of excommunicated from the idea of, you know, how a composer should be writing at this moment in time. So it's the UK sort of music and art scene has always been quite good at allowing people to develop their own sound world in that sense. And you know, it goes back to my time at the RNCM, where, you know, I wasn't forced to write a certain way, or write in a certain style. So yeah, yeah.
So, and okay, we've got a few minutes left.
Yeah.
So what are you hoping to hear from your world premiere tomorrow?
I haven't heard. Well, I suppose with the onset of lockdown and the cancellation of concerts, it will just be great to hear something that's performed live, even though it's sort of broadcast via the internet. But it will be great to have a premiere, and just to. I've not heard it live myself, so I suppose my excitement is just the same as any other listener that will be tuned in. So it'll be great to hear it come to life, really.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
we're really excited for you to hear. I know that we did actually say perhaps, you know, we could do video rehearsals or something, but I just thought we'll present it to you as how we have interpreted,
Yeah.
you know, what we hope, what we've interpreted well, what
Yeah.
you have put down
Yeah.
on the page for us. And having heard, I think it was Molly playing in the BBC, the piece that precedes this, I think I understand the kind of sound world that you were going to. Someone says, I can't wait for live music to return. Yeah, I think we all
I think we're all in the same boat.
very very much in that situation. So what you're working on right now, is there anything that you're on a deadline to finish, or is it fairly, are you taking it fairly easy?
No, I'm working on a few pieces. Some of them are not been announced yet, so we'll keep them secret until they are announced. But yeah, there's a few sort of chamber works, a few orchestral things in the pipeline. So yeah, I'm working through them slowly as I'm out here, and it's a nice change of scenery to be able to sort of, you know, change my mindset of being in and around London, and yeah, just clear the mind and get composing.
On the coast? Did you say you were
Yeah,
on the?
it's on the coast. Yeah, so the Baltic Sea is not far from where I am. There's lots of nice woods. Um, or sort of, you can see the sort of woods over there,
Oh
and
yeah,
it's yeah.
lovely.
And the weather's very sort of glorious around here. I'm sort of surrounded by nice plants and
Oh.
vegetables and all that sort of jazz. So
Well,
it's a
it's
great retreat. I hear that Arvo part is around these parts somewhere. So who
oh,
knows? Maybe I'll bump into him on my sort of daily walk somewhere.
you might do. That would
Yeah,
be really. You please do
yeah.
do take a photo of it. It's set to be a gorgeous day in London, and as I kind of wrap this up, please invite everyone who's watching this to tune in tomorrow. It's the first live concert that the LSO are putting on, a series of basically short recitals. So 1 o'clock tomorrow via the LSO social media or YouTube. You will see myself and my colleague Julian, and we are going to be playing violin duets and giving a world premiere of Dappled Light, which has been written by Danny during the lockdown and for us. So we get to make a world premiere of it. We're very, very, very excited about that. But Danny, thank you so much for
Thank you.
giving your
Thanks for
time
having me.
and and giving us so much insight into the way you work, the way you compose, and even your great advice for young people. So do look up Danny Kidane on social media. Sorry, I shouldn't want to call you Danny. Daniel
That's
Kidane.
right. Daniel Kidane. Danny Kidane. It's cool.
I think you're a Danny. So do check out his social media and his website, and do tune in tomorrow, 1 p.m. London time. And I really look forward to seeing you there. You can actually tweet in questions and stuff for Julian and I. So in case you want to ask something about any of the pieces, specifically Danny's piece perhaps. But I really hope to see you all there. Thanks so much, Danny.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thanks. Bye,
I'll see
everybody. See you tomorrow.
you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.